Hey, good evening, everyone. How you doing? Hey, it's middle of February 2021, and we're in the middle of a cold spell here as well. And I guess this cold must be still affecting how we start these shows, because we just had a great practice run of the 4 minutes of not being live on the show. So it was our best opening we've ever had, and we didn't have it on live. So sorry, folks, but we're here now, and we're going to have a great show. We got Bill and Dave again with us tonight. Guys, we had a great conversation about how cold it is and running snowplows and all. And Bill, why don't you tell everybody about the trains over at Easton and what's going on over there? Things running with all this cold weather?
We're still trying to run them. We got a few folks probably frozen to the fence, mostly kids.
With their tongue stuck to the fence? Maybe?
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
It's difficult for everybody this time of year, but we've cleaned one of the tracks off and have the trolley line running. So it can be done.
Fantastic. And Dave, what kind of projects have you gotten into in the last 2 weeks?
Not much the past 2 weeks. I'm kind of at a spot where my trestles are done. My portals are done. I need the weather to warm up so I can do some things outside with the tunnels and kind of get those set up. So not much going on the past couple weeks. I will say I did make it up to Springfield to the plastic lumber store and picked up some plastic 2x4s with the intent to eventually, once things warm up, to create that world-renowned Bill Logan ladder system that I've read so much about. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, is this the same Bill Logan that from Columbus? And it is. It's articles from Europe, and I'm reading about Bill Logan's ladder system, and it's Bill Logan right here. So looking forward to starting that, but again, just need some warm weather.
Yeah, I think we'll venture over to your house when it warms up, and we'll do an outdoor live show from your house. I think you've got a lot of great projects to do this spring, and we can cover a lot of topics at your house. So
yeah. Plenty of work to do, so plenty of shows we can do at my house and just straighten everything up for me. So
straighten everything
for
up
the benefit of our viewers, not for me, for the viewers.
That's right. So yeah, very good. Well, looking here, we've got quite a few people have chimed in on the chat tonight. I see Doug Krust, Andrew, Mr. Pictovid, OSU Woody Buck, Fred is here, Cody's here. So guys, please feel free to join in the conversation and grab yourself a hot cup of cocoa and settle in for a nice show while Bill tells us all about his couplers and wheel lecture he has planned for us.
Ooh, lecture?
Lecture. Well,
hands-on clinic. Okay.
Hands-on clinic. It's going to be all you. But if anybody tuned in for the last show, we had 3 tables set up, and
3 tables.
I don't know. We had a lot set up last time, but we're limited ourselves to 1 table. So hopefully this show will be under 5 hours is the goal for tonight. So.
And Jed, before we get started, so Bill, keeping in line with every show that we've had so far, I think couplers and wheels are often overlooked, and it's something that wasn't even on my radar just starting off in the hobby until I bought some used cars that don't connect because they have different couplers, or the couplers aren't matching up, or some wheels are plastic, some are metal, and just things that weren't even on my radar. So again, with the intention to help us new folks kind of figure things out, I'm once again looking forward to everything you have to share.
You get all that stuff at no extra cost when you buy used from different suppliers and different equipment.
Yeah.
It is an issue. It's a problem. And what we're trying to do here tonight is give you some guidance on what to look for, what to avoid, and hopefully how to minimize the long-term hassle factor. The idea is keep the trains on the track is pretty much it, and be able to couple them and uncouple them with as little hassle as possible. And there's certain ways we figured out how to do that. And there's things you got to look out for that'll get in your way. So we'll jump right into it. But it's classically the case with me. We always have a hangers on from our last clinic. I don't think that our meeting tonight's not going to be any different. I wanted to, I had a few questions asked of me and from last meeting because we attempted to cover the whole gamut of controls for the railroad. And having separated the issue into DC or analog DC, as we spoke about, DCC and RC, radio control, we showed different solutions for each of those categories. And I was asked, hasn't someone come up with a control system that can run the gamut across the spectrum of control types? Case in point, nowadays you get an engine, more likely than not, the engine will already have a DCC board in it. You'll know because you'll be paying another 150 to $200 for that engine probably, because it'll have a DCC board in it. Whether you utilize it or not is pretty much, again, back up to you. The engines are designed and programmed to run on analog and or analog DC or DCC. But it all still comes back to the control system because the engine doesn't determine that, you determine that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so jumping right in, I will say at this point, and that's the qualifier, like everything in life, if I could say there's one universal unit that I've had luck with across the spectrum of running the trains under analog DC, integrate them into a DCC engine system, and or the final issue of just making them radio control battery operated. The one control system that I've been able to adapt to all of those for both myself and clients has been the Crest Revolution unit, which I got here. And let's see where we're at here. So the other thing I like about it is, well, it's the transmitter is handheld, battery operated, and it's done in English for all intents and purposes. It tells you the engine, the speed you're operating by, the direction, and only when you get into, quote, accessories like bells and whistles do you have to get down and press buttons to activate those. But for the most part, we got, well, the three basic categories are lights, bells, and I'm going to say whistles if you're a steamer like myself, or horn if you're in the diesel equipment, or both. And same controller for all three of those solutions, same transmitter for all three of those solutions. Yes, you have to monkey with the other angle of it, the pieces parts. If you have just an analog DC system that is transformer operated, they offer a box for all intents and purposes that you can connect in with your transformer, and it'll once again power the track with variable voltage and the ability to switch the polarity. And again, it's all controlled from this unit, which is no different than some of the other solutions we showed you last time. If you go to disassembling the engines and integrating a receiver, which is what's right here. This is a receiver. This is a receiver. This receiver runs the entire track system like your standard analog system does. This you integrate into individual engines, turn the power at the transformer on full bore, 22 volts, and then you can control each engine independently from one another on analog DC. Now, if you want to get involved in more line with the DCC end of the business, similar but different, it's a different catalog number, but for all intents and purposes, it looks the same. It's a DCC receiver, and it'll integrate with your existing DCC control in your engine and operate individual components. Again, sound, whistle, bell, lights, that again, all same controller. And then last but not least, if you're into radio control, battery operated, a la the battery issue here we showed last time. You go back, literally, you can go back to either the analog control if you don't have a DCC board in the engine, or go utilize the DCC product and integrate it with a battery, and you got complete radio control of the individual engines. So you can run multiple engines on the same track.
Yep.
The nice thing about the so-called dead rail battery operated deal is you don't have to monkey with or be worried with polarity changes in the track, which is an issue with DCC and analog DC.
Yeah.
Don't want to get the issue any further than that. But the point is, all of this stuff still gets operated by the same handheld controller. So once you get this figured out, how to turn it on, how to turn it off, and push the button up, down, over and around, then you're good to go once you get the boards and the equipment. And you can go from one system to another, quite frankly. Okay. Point taken. That's Crest's Revolution system. That's where we are in the hobby at the moment. There are ways to adapt a number of the product lines to at least two of the three options, maybe not totally across the board. And I'm sure as time goes on, they'll figure out how to provide revised electronics for the control systems that we talked about that'll do the same thing. But right now, for the $300 category, you have the ability to control the systems and go from there. We'll move on unless anybody has some questions on that issue.
Yeah, just a nice follow-up from last week or 2 weeks ago show, and great. I see a lot of comments already popping up on couplers and coupling up and things. So I think people are ready to start talking about wheels and couplers.
Okay, so there we are.
Where are we gonna start here? Well,
we're going to start with the wheels, and we'll move on to the couplers. Wheels and trucks, really. Okay, we did fill the table up here with the issues of wheels and trucks to begin with, and I'm going to try to keep our conversation into two categories. First, maintenance. Okay, the idea is, well, okay, you've bought the cars now, and you've run the cars. How are you going to maintain the cars? Well, with respect to the trucks and the wheels, the normal maintenance issues are cleaning them off at the end of the season to keep debris and moisture from gathering up in the wheel sets, and then checking the equipment over to make sure that it's operating as close to what it was when you purchased it, and presumably it's new or close to that, and taking care of any hitches to the get along the way. And one of the first things you'll get into, if everything falls into the category, okay, if the wheel sets and the trucks seem to be fine, no broken pieces, no chips, no nicks, no musses, no fusses, then the simple matter most of the time is to go ahead, and this is a great time of year to do this, is to go ahead and lubricate the trucks. There's a few points and locations that you need to do that in. Are we good as far as details here? Well, okay. With regard to the wheels, all of them come into the journals. That's a point that needs lubricated. I've recommended through the other workshops, and I'll still stick with it as a good option here, is CRC 262 plastic compatible lubricant. It's a light grade lubricant. It isn't heavy. It's definitely not a grease. I've seen a lot of folks go out and say, well, we need to grease the journals because the real railroads grease the journals. Well, Of course, they're roller bearings these days, but in the days when we had journals and they needed grease, was the standard operating procedure. I don't recommend that because grease always collects dirt, grime, and will tend to wear away at the lighter plastic material far sooner than would occur otherwise. The problems we've seen, and you'll have to check it, and this is also one of the issues you need to look for, and it may require you to take the wheel sets out if there seems to be distinct wear. Let's see. Do I get a distinct wear one here? Yeah. Okay. Let me use this truck here. Just looking at the plastic wheel, and by the way, all the equipment when you initially purchase it, unless maybe it's used, typically comes straight from the manufacturers, more often than not, with plastic wheel sets. These little light puppies. Okay, they've been fine. They've served the hobby excellently ever since since the hobby's been out there and starting in the late 60s and running up from that point. It's a hard plastic material. I know in the case of LGB, they use a material called Narelle, which is pretty tough stuff.
Yeah.
And
do you know what the melting point is for Narelle?
It's yes. If you hit it with a soldering iron, it will melt. I know that.
So
okay, so we're talking up.
degrees.
Yeah, we're up beyond the point of solder melting.
I'm just wondering on a really hot day how hot brass rail will get under the sun. Right, if it gets over that.
I'll make a point now. One of the problems we've always found with plastic wheels, and the wheel sets I got here are examples of that. If you're able to look real,
Here, I can put the
this
other.
is where we do the notorious real closely issue. Okay, you'll see this truck here. This wheel set is worn. More so than even the other one. That's because I replaced one and kept the other. And what's happened is the plastic is worn away after the car has ran for hundreds and hundreds of hours. And the question becomes, well, wait a minute, where did that plastic go? Well, typically the plastic deposits itself ever so slowly, but consistently on the rail. And therefore it becomes a grime and crud factor, and it ultimately hinders your ability of the engine to pick power up from the track if you're still back in the analog or DCC equipment and ends of things, which most of us are. So I'll touch base on the other points with why it quickly gets us into why we change plastic wheels out for metal, but I'll get ahead of myself. How's that? Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Okay. As far as the maintenance aspects of it, it's important, particularly because the trucks and the wheel sets, the wheels, are plastic. They tend to wear. The axles are metal, and therefore being a harder material will wear the journals away, the journal sockets away, as opposed to wearing the metal axle itself away. And what will happen is these will ultimately become oval and begin to create problems for you running consistently straight down the track and without derailing. And so after a while, you'll get the hang of how long you've had it and how much the equipment is run. It behooves you at times to physically take the wheel sets out. Most of these, you can take the wheel sets out simply by bending it, because once again, the plastic is pretty darn tough. And in so doing, not only check the wheel set itself, but again, back to the truck, and you can see, in fact, this wheel set here is starting to oval out a little bit. Yeah. And it's not to the point where I'd be concerned yet that it needs replaced. But if you don't want that to happen sooner versus later, you need to lubricate routinely, depending on how much runtime you got in the equipment, your truck and wheel sets. Okay, and it's just a matter of just putting just a dab of lubricant on each of those points.
Hey, Bill,
Yeah.
that lubricant you mentioned, is that specific for trains that you buy in a hobby shop, or where do you get that?
No, the CRC product that I recommend, have no affiliation to CRC, by the way, is actually, it's available readily at all the Home Depots that I have seen, that I have gone into. It's in the electrical department. It's used a lot of times by the electricians in lubricating electrical components. The key to its success is it is plastic compatible, meaning that it will not craze or eat away at your plastic. If you go out and get your normal hardware store 3-in-1 oil, which is prevalent out there, it will eat away at your plastic. It'll soften it and ultimately craze it, and you'll be sorry that you used it.
Yeah.
It'll still lubricate it, don't get me wrong. But it definitely works, just doesn't work indefinitely, kind of deal. So back to
it's like stuff you shouldn't use, like sandpaper on your railroad.
Yes, don't use sandpaper.
And don't use 3-in-1 oil.
Don't use 3-in-1 oil.
So there's two things you can take away with your show tonight. Watching.
All right. So I mentioned the business of oiling the point where the axle fits into the journals on both sides. And then the other point that's important too is the pivot point of where the truck mates into the car body. There's just as much wear there as there is at times with the wheels, because as the train goes down the track, of course, the trucks are constantly rotating based off of your curve system. And the other point that most people don't necessarily realize, most all the manufacturers in some form or fashion produce what is called a 3-point suspension system. Most of LGB, Pico, I think Aristo is one of the few people that tried to do spring-loaded systems, and I think Accucraft also, where they tried to provide a suspension system on the trucks that would go over uneven track and not derail. Well, what most of them have found is the easier way that gets solved is molding into the plastic of the car bodies where the trucks meet the bolster, if you will, of the car body itself, is what's called 3-point suspension, meaning that one truck will typically rock side to side, and one truck will rock forward and backwards. Hence, 1-point, 2-point suspension, a triangle, stabilizes the car on the track far better and keeps it from rocking as it rolls down the track. By the way, if you have a car that tends to wobble down, odds are something's worn badly enough by way of the trucks and wheel systems that you ought to mark it. I typically just take a piece of tape, mark the car so that I can get back to it at a later point and remember which car it was.
Interesting.
Each of the manufacturers provide a slightly different system, but for most of them provide this 3-point issue. And therefore, it's important to go ahead and lubricate that bearing surface in order to minimize the wear. Because once these wear, it's really difficult to repair it. More often than not, the car body gets chucked in the scheme of things if it's worn badly enough. We see accelerated wear out at Easton because, of course, the trains out there run 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, certainly during the summer, maybe not this month. And therefore, it accelerates the wear, and we're able to see how this works out over time. For the typical home garden railroader, I'm sure that wear pattern would occur not as anywhere near as soon, but will still happen over time. And all we're pointing out is lubrication minimizes that long-term problem for you.
Yeah. Now, Bill, have you found let's say you had a railroad that was all left-hand turns, NASCAR style, all left, will one side wear faster than the other? Do you find?
I love how you lead into my issues here. This is a Pico combine, has metal wheels with pickups, and let's see, am I going to do it here? Let's switch up here to our other camera. Look at the tire versus the flange on this car. Right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Look how what looks to be a very large flange, which it's not. It's just that the tread of the
hold
tire
it down just a little bit.
has worn.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Wow.
The tread of this tire has worn so badly that it's made the flange. The flange hasn't grown any. It's just that the tire has shrunk that much. and it's because it's a brass base. And yes, this engine ran in one direction around a circle from weeks and weeks on end, and because of that,
That outside,
it simply wore down. We use stainless rail out there, so the trucks and particularly the wheel sets are softer, and therefore they will wear, not the rail.
wow.
And that's what happens. Thank you for that lead-in.
And those are solid axles, so that both tires are turning at the same rate.
Yeah,
So when it's going around a curve, the outside tire wants to go further. So one tire has to slip.
yeah. The sharper your curve, maybe remember we made the recommendation that the starter set equipment typically comes with 2-foot radius, 4-foot diameter track, and we recommend a minimum of 4-foot radius, 8-foot diameter track. And what that does is minimize, it far extends the wear factor on the wheel sets, because the inner wheel is not attempting to turn. I don't want to say it doesn't turn faster, but it wears faster because it's traveling over a shorter piece of rail, wearing away at it.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, there's a way to get past. No, we'll jump to that. If you use ball bearing wheels, which we got here tonight.
Yeah, here, let me switch cameras.
The ball bearing wheels rotate independently. There, I'm holding this wheel.
Yeah, you can probably hold it and you can turn one way. Yeah.
Doing that. And then
it's hard to capture that on the camera, but yeah, one wheel is spinning and
rotate independently from one another, and cost twice as much, but don't wear. These are great for short radius tracks because they run independently from one another, amongst all the other benefits, which I'll point out in a little bit. Okay, back to the
program.
Core issue here. Okay. A couple of things you need to check normally, and this requires a track gauge. And in a pinch, I guess you can still use, if you pick a piece of track, you can always try to check your track gauge. What I've typically done is take a standard wheel set and match it up with what I'm looking at on my equipment to see if the back-to-back flange depth is the same and there's no real wear happening. If you get more sophisticated and you want to spend a little more money, you use something like Katie's track gauge that already has an indentation that defines whether or not your wheel sets are correctly spaced.
At the right gauge, yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple things with regard to the wheels that are important. Not only is there the flange to flange dimension, which is what sets on the track and the rails, but also the back-to-back dimension, which I got another gauge here, tells me that, this dimension here, because that back-to-back becomes important with regard to switches. The switches for the track through the switches correctly requires a standard back-to-back spacing on the wheel sets in order to, because they're retained by the guardrails when they go through the frogs of the switches.
Yeah, show us that with your other hand moving the. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Like that. Okay. Yeah, the only way this works is for a consistent back-to-back spacing on the wheel sets. I'll make another point there. Okay, so you need to check all those things. The wear will eventually normally show up on the flanges and the treads. Then the wear points on the trucks. The point I'll make at this juncture, because just like David said, he purchases other equipment. I always recommend trying to remain consistent, certainly with the wheel sets, and maintain the same truck that came with the equipment. Don't be swapping out another car from another manufacturer's truck. It may look similar, but usually there's always some differences in it that can cause problems with the proper tracking of the equipment. So keep the same wheel sets I'm sorry, keep the same trucks with the same car. You can change out the wheel sets themselves, and that gets us into the issue of transition from maintenance to replacement. And the question becomes, well, wait a minute, why should I consider replacing, let us say, our plastic wheel sets with metal? And I'll make that point in just a minute. One other issue I want to comment on. You'll look at this truck here. All the plastic wheels on the market are typically made the same way. Want to go up here? I'm driving you nuts, right? Okay, we'll do that. Okay, they're made the same way. You have a wheel and a half axle on both sides, which are independent moldings, and then you have a common axle that runs through it. Now, with the factory, they go ahead and squeeze that
together, so it's
together, and
most
it's
narrow.
supposedly at the right gauge, so they don't have to monkey with it. They check it every once in a while. But what you'll find out, particularly with older equipment, once the plastic starts wearing and gets some age on it, there is a tendency for that to re-separate and therefore widen your gauge and start creating problems with tracking that way.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, we can sort of squeeze those. This is a new one, so it doesn't want to go back together. But you can see the point here. Okay?
Yeah, we see the separation.
Okay. One works, one don't work. All right. Now I get back to why would you consider replacing it? Well, that's one reason, because all the metal wheels on the market are typically, although they have some plastic elements associated with them at times, some don't, they're fixed onto the axles for a couple of reasons, just by the way they're manufactured. But understand, because they're metal, not plastic, they can conduct electricity, and therefore they have to isolate each wheel from the other opposite side in order to keep the power in the rails from shorting out. And the only way they've figured out how to do that is provide a more robust assembly of the wheel axle systems with the metal wheels, so that the problem with the plastic wheel sets don't occur.
Yeah, it's just a good idea to make that switch.
So even though why do plastic wheels come with all the train cars that you buy initially, particularly brand new from the manufacturers? Because it's the least costly, a la cheap way, and they work. They do work. You can run for years and years with plastic wheels until you wear them out, if you want.
Yeah.
Why would you then want to consider metal wheels, which most of us have been in the hobby after a while do? A couple principal reasons. We'll switch over from our plastic to our metal wheel sets. This is an LGB wheel. Here's a LGB metal wheel here, a solid axle. Why would you want to consider it? Well, number one is they wear better. Now you got metal against metal wheel against metal rail. They don't wear out anywhere near as much as the plastic.
Sure.
They don't deposit on the rail like the plastic does. And you brought up the issue of the heat. Well, I know in talking to folks that are down in the Southwest and hotter portions of the country, that they have much quicker wear on the wheel sets because the hot rail temperatures soften the plastic much sooner than it would otherwise here, maybe in the Northeast.
Yep.
But the last point that I want to make with regard to why metal wheels, because you're going to spend more for them, is the weight ratio. The metal wheels over the plastic wheels are at least as double the weight, if not a slightly more.
Yeah, you got the weight down lower instead of.
Yeah, and therefore you change the center of gravity of the overall car to a lower point, and therefore it tracks better that way. It tracks better just because of the metal wheel function.
I can think of one more reason. The sound. They have a nice clickety-clack.
Yes.
And they sound really nice when you have a big, long train of them, and they're going over that small little gap, and tick, 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 tick,
Sound like a real railroad. Real
Sounds
train.
like a real railroad.
Real railroad on real rails for all
Yeah.
the same reasons.
Yeah.
Plastic wheels, typically you cannot pull as long of trains because the cars don't track as well. You'll sustain more derailments, let's say, when you do that. Whereas the metal wheels, because it shifts the center of gravity, they tend to track better. Tends to reduce, doesn't eliminate it, but reduce that. Where you notice it most is if you try to back up the equipment as opposed to go forward, where you're pulling everything. If you try to push things, is where it really shows up. The plastic wheels have a higher probability of
there's
derailing.
exceptions to every rule. When my cog railroad is being pushed up the mountain, I found having metal wheels, it fell off every time. Now I have another theory to why that was happening, because I think the flange was not the right angle, and the kind, I'll call it the hybrid, the metal wrapped plastic wheels by far perform the best being pushed up that mountain.
Well, it brings up the issue that from my recommendation on this whole subject is whether you stick with plastic wheels or you go to metal wheels, select a particular manufacturer's wheel and stick with it, even between different equipment. So that means some cars you'll have to change out the wheels on. Others maybe come with that particular, Bachmann. If you use a Bachmann or an LGB and it has metal wheels, you can stick with them, that kind of issue. Why? Well, because here's the difference. Here's an AHM, Accucraft, more to scale flat car upside down here. I don't know if we can catch this close enough. And here's a Bachmann. It comes off their flat car, not quite as scale. But there's a world of difference. In fact, there's a slight difference in gauge, but the flange is 3 times as deep on the Bachmann wheel as it is on the Accucraft. Now, that's not to say that the Accucraft will work better. It probably will derail sooner because it'll require a higher quality of maintenance on the rail in terms of gauge, level, radius, that kind of thing, which is why every manufacturer out there, if you compare wheel sets, the wheel sets are different.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, I pick a manufacturer and stick with it so you have consistency. The name of the game here is consistency.
Sure.
Even if you have different manufactured cars, stick with the same manufacturer with regard to the wheel sets. You'll be a lot happier over the long run, because essentially the wheel sets once you make the buy off on metal wheels, you're going to roughly be spending the same amount of money until you get into the roller bearing. Then they really sock it to you on those. But that's one level up the chain of why you want to consider metal wheels here. Well, I got it upside down, so I'll make comment. Down here, this is one of the new Kadee. And normally when you think of Kadee, you think of couplers, and we'll get to them in a minute. But they are also now offering as very scale-oriented. The flanges are still deeper than normal. Our Accucraft car over here is pretty close to fine scale. But the flanges on these are far less, and they look more prototypical in the overall scheme of things. If that's where you want to be, fine. They offer the product too. They're not a car manufacturer, but they offer the trucks as an aftermarket issue, just like they do their couplers.
And we have a question. Is there any tolerance for wheel side-to-side free play, or should the wheels be solid against the axle?
Well, I'm glad they brought that up.
Is that your next point?
That's right. Well, hey, got everything here. Let's see. Do I want to do this way? Okay. So this is a standard LGB short side gondola. Came with the plastic wheels with their plastic trucks, standard right out of the box. Even LGB, this is the truck as it came, has side play. If you can sit here and move the wheel back and forth in relationship to the truck. What I've typically done, if you can see a portion of the axle sticking out, it's probably got a little too much distance in it. What I've typically done is gone ahead, and this truck here is an example of that. I've actually put a nylon washer in on the axle to reduce, if not attempt to limit. There's still a minor bit of play, but a very minor play. And that helps the tracking issue also.
So just a little bit of play is what you want, not sloppy.
Right.
Sure.
It gets, if you can easily see the axle between the wheel and the journal, and it's probably, well, maybe I'll say it this way. If you can put a nylon washer down there and not have the wheel bind up on you, then it's probably to your advantage to do that to end that side play.
Now, I've got my 2-axle boxcar here, and I mean, there's probably at least a 1/4-inch play from side to side. So does it make a difference with 2-axle to 4-axle?
Same issue, both whether it's two axle or 4-axle,
16-axle, whatever. Yeah, it's all
okay. Same story. You need to stop the side play, particularly on the same truck. I mean, there it's far more critical. But again, it helps on the wear issue. It helps on the tracking issue. In the scheme of things, I got these nylon washers here in over at Roush Hardware.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be the place to get it, or
you get a gazillion of them for a couple bucks. No big deal. And they are nylon, so they won't rust. Don't get steel because steel will rust even if you lubricate it.
Now, what's the hole diameter? Inside hole diameter?
It's the correct size diameter for the wheels. Take your wheel set with you and fit it.
Yeah. Okay.
There, and they come in different thicknesses too, so that
you could buy a variety. Sure.
Yeah, you don't have, you can either use one washer, a thick washer, or 2 small, thinner washers.
Okay.
In the scheme of things, but recommend that, and particularly if you start swapping wheel sets to the different manufacturers' trucks, you are going to get variations. Even if the wheels are in gauge, the axle lengths are slightly different. And the faces of the wheels are slightly different, how they made up with the trucks.
Yeah.
So be forewarned on that.
Okay.
And let's see, where's my other little ditty? Oh, okay, in the miscellaneous category, I went down the list here. On wheel sets, some wheel sets come pre-blackened. There's a Pico here. Some sets like the LGB have the inner portion of the wheel, not the tread and or the flange, blackened, but look adequately prototypical. Some of the manufacturers like Sandval, which is an aftermarket product, and or USA wheels, or even the Cadies that I mentioned earlier, don't come painted. And therefore you can get into the business of painting them if you have tons more time on your hands.
Right.
Don't recommend painting the tread for obvious reasons, because all you're going to do is redeposit that paint back on the rail again.
Yeah.
Pico does a marvelous job with their wheel sets because they actually, I know what they do. They pre-paint the whole thing and then come back and manually sand off the paint on the tread of the wheels, so you don't have the deposit.
Or you just get a 1/8-inch thick tape, wrap it around the tread.
A lot of fun. You can spend a ton of time. That's why we do this stuff during the winter. Okay, you don't do this during the summer when you got other things to do. This is the time of year that you can do that. Although keep ventilation in mind when you're painting inside. Yes. Don't paint the treads. Some require washers, as I say. Some steel axles. Okay. The best thing I can recommend, some manufacturers produce steel axles. Most of them these days are producing stainless steel axles. And the quickie way to, when you look at them, well, wait a minute, what is that? I can't tell whether that's a stainless steel axle or metal axle. Well, bring your handy dandy magnet. And if this happens, don't use those, because I can guarantee these will rust up outdoors in no time flat. Maybe if you got a paint coating on them, they will. What are you going to do? You're going to say, "Oh, you're out of here, kid." Well, you're going to have to
Jim, those axles we found last year.
Keep that car lubricated is all I can tell you. Don't leave it out in the weather. No. Don't leave it out in the rain. The first night you do, she'll start rusting on you.
Oh, no.
There you go.
Luckily, I I work for a company that owns a plating company. So if I needed to get them stripped and replated, maybe with zinc.
Yeah.
thick
Because keep in
zinc.
mind, not only will the axle between the wheels rust, but the axle, most importantly, where it goes into the journals, will rust.
Right, which will
And,
be
and now
very
you'll
aggressive
just
and-
the whole thing will come grinding to a halt after in short period of time. Okay. So be forewarned on that one.
Okay. Well,
What else do I want to make comment on here?
that was a
lot
good
of the
deal
wheels.
last
Some of the
year.
wheels, some of the wheels are steel. I think it's sand valves. No, not that one.
Yeah, Dave, are you checking your?
I am. You got me worried.
Start running around. I don't recommend steel wheels. I don't recommend steel axles because they're going to. Now the thing is, the real railroads are all steel, right? Well, they don't give a crap because of the size and weight of the whole thing.
Yeah,
But we do because a little bit of rust on these things goes a long way to create problems.
Yeah.
I don't recommend steel either way. Stainless steel axles, but quite frankly, a lot of this is stainless steel tread here. Now, I guess the qualifier would be if you're an indoor G-scale railroader, which we have some.
Yep.
Hey, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
But don't use them outside.
Yeah.
Most of the wheels outdoors, like in the case of the Pico product, are brass with a plated finish on them. No, I don't want to say most. Some of them are. And what happens over time, here's a axle set there. You can see where the brass or the nickel plating is worn off the tread and leaves the brass. I already pointed out the situation with our Pico combine here, where the wear was so bad it wore completely down through the plating, completely down through the brass tread of the wheel, and kept on going. But it still ran, by the way. It still ran.
So those axle or the wheels that you were showing us earlier, where they wore way down.
Yeah.
They're solid stainless steel. That's just
no. It's, these were brass on the Pico.
Oh,
These are brass. They're plated brass.
Okay.
And if you run them long enough, they will wear down.
Yeah. No, brass is fairly soft as well.
Well, okay. So like in the case of LGB, these are stainless steel tires, stainless steel axles, and they use the plastic inner portions to mimic. It gets them around having to paint the stuff. Okay. And, these work fine and look reasonably prototypical in the scheme of things. Let's see. Yeah, LGB, both ends of it. Bachmann, every Bachmann I have seen, they have started. They were unplated, but they've now began to put a darkening agent on their on the wheel sets to get them darker looking. They're still shiny, but they're dark, not bright, shiny metal.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things. And every one of these have slightly different prices in them, so you pays your money and takes your chances on the whole thing here.
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill. While you're holding those up, so once you pop those wheels out of your trucks and you're doing your maintenance, you're lubricating, like, do you do anything to the actual wheel itself? Like, do you do like rubbing alcohol on the wheel to like clean it off, or is there any maintenance you do to the actual like wheel set?
Normally, if the equipment is ran outdoors, it tends to be self-cleaning, has been my experience. The only problems I get into are indoors, where there's a typical buildup of dust, dirt, and accumulated lubrication, where there's actually, quite frankly, crud factor, if you will, on the tire. And yes, the easiest solution is our good old denatured alcohol with a clean cotton cloth will quickly take that material, that crud material off to get you back to the base metal. It takes a whole lot of crud. If you got enough that builds up so badly on the tread that runs you a risk that the wheel isn't going to track correctly, and I think you need to look into what's causing that.
Yeah, maybe pine sap would do that.
Yeah.
Or
Well, yeah, outdoors, the typical. Well, I'll go to Easton again, where we got, as we affectionately say, squirrel dew and bird poo, and I think we talked a little earlier too about ants. Ants that use the rails, particularly when they're powered, because they're attracted to the magnetic effect, well, those will really screw you up as far as crud factor on the wheels. They're sappy kind of material that gathers up. So the denatured alcohol will take care of all of it, is what I've found.
Yeah. Okay. And a Q-tip. Clean.
So yeah, it's valuable to consider, quite honestly, and I don't know if the wives are out there listening in on this one, probably not. I always tended in the wintertime with our dishwasher, when my wife wasn't around, to take the cars without having to disassemble them, put them in the dishwasher, run the whole thing through the thing, takes all the crud factor off and everything. They look great. It's like a set of dishes when you pull them out. And I move on because the dish detergent cleans the whole thing and doesn't strip the paint or the lettering or anything off the cars. So
okay.
If you happen to have a dishwasher and maybe not a wife, then
right, you're all set.
You're set on the deal there. Okay.
Yeah, honey, how long is it going to take you to go shopping? I need 2 hours.
Before we leave this piece of the discussion, you have your basic wheel sets that we've already begun talking about in the business of metal. These are standard axle metal tread wheel sets. And then you can get into the ball bearing end of the business because it solves the problem we talked earlier, and they track better. And in fact, they can actually pick up power from the rails to power the innards of your car as far as lights are concerned. And a number of products are available out there. Pico, LGB provide them. I showed a little bit earlier. Here's the LGB product again, or I'm sorry, the Pico product again. Yeah. Where you can see here is the power pickup. So your wiring that comes down out of your car can plug right into that.
Yes.
And it's polarized. It's separated, isolated in here. So you have positive and negative available readily right off the truck. And you're not, the old combine here is the way they used to do power pickups. And if you look here, you'll see.
Is that the ones with little sliders?
Copper wipes that literally wipe against the inner portion of the tire in order to pick up power. And that's great, but none of those wheels will not turn on their own because of the friction created by the wiper system.
Yeah, those Pico pickup wheels are very smooth running.
These are phenomenal. The only problem we've seen on occasion is if you have a high power, so if you're running like 22 volt consistently, interestingly enough, and if you run the equipment in the same direction consistently without switching things around, changing cars, I don't think this is necessarily a problem for individual garden railroads, but like with us with displays.
Show it on the other camera there.
Other displays, then the problem will be there's arcing that occurs up inside where the ball bearings are that pick up the power, and eventually it wears away at the ball bearings. Again, the qualifier here is you have a consistent voltage, high voltage, 22 volts, and you are running the equipment in one direction only. Therefore, the polarity stays the same.
Yeah.
In one case, the electrons, if you will, are being deposited on the other rail. On the other wheel, they're being removed. They're moving around. Let's say it that way. Okay. And therefore, one side, the bearings will fail because of that electrical issue. Now, if you're dead rail, it's not an issue. But then if you're dead rail, you don't have power pickup issues in terms of the metal wheels, but you still have the ability of the easy considerably reduced friction on the wheel sets. Oh, by the way, a metal wheel, well, let's see, where are we at here? Yeah, plastic wheel, you can pick up 2 of them for $5. The metal wheels start, they're 10 to 15-ish in the dollar category. And last but not least are the primo, roller bearing jobs.
Yeah.
And you're going to be up into the $20, $30 category. So, okay, so you've gone out and, you got a real deal on your $25, $30 car used from somebody. and then you get to spend $50 between wheels and possibly couplers to upgrade it to a finer scale condition for your operational pleasure.
Yeah, to answer a question, Malicious SCW, the little pins you see are actually screws, so you can screw your electrical lead right onto those. Is that correct? Is that you don't have to solder it on there?
Correct.
You can back out the screw.
Most of you can get a slip over connector that'll allow your wire to mechanically attach itself, not without the need for solder to the truck. Keep in mind that the axle and therefore the pin positions never move. Only the tires rotate on the rail, so the inner parts aren't moving around for you.
Yeah, and since we're plugging this product, I will say that it is Pico part number 36167 from Pico. I don't remember what the cost is, but you can go onto the Pico America website and pick those up. They're very nice. Pico, if you're listening, we're accepting.
That's a good overview with regard to the wheels, plastic versus metal, options that are available out there. Does anybody have any questions on that particular component? Otherwise, we'll move on to couplers. The further we go, the more complicated it gets here.
Yeah.
Bill, I hesitate to ask this because I think it's sort of a silly question, but it's something I ran across. And again, being new, I want to throw this out there. So on my Pico starter set, it has plastic wheels. I turn the car upside down, the wheels spin very easily, very free. You just kind of spin it with your finger. So then I bought some used equipment, turned the cars over, and the wheels are metal, and I try to spin them, and they don't spin as freely or easily. So I took them off, lubricated them, put them back on, and it was still not, I guess, spinning as freely as like the plastic ones that I had experience with prior. And when I saw you lift up your cars, and especially that yellow one, and kind of spin those wheels, it looks about the same as what mine did. So I guess that's a long way to get to. Is there a good way to say, yeah. So assuming metal wheels are heavier, they don't spin as easily or freely, or is there a time when I do spin it, pick it up, spin it, and I would know that this definitely needs lubricated?
Yeah, the clue would be under normal circumstances, the wheel should spin and spin a dozen times in terms of its rotation as a number here. Here's the plastic sets, and it may be hard to see, but you can almost hear it. It takes a good 10 plus rotations and a few seconds before the friction catches up to it and stops. There's the KDs that are doing the same thing, but at the same time, there's the Accucrafts, and they're stinkers. As fine scale as they are, they're so tightly positioned in the trucks that without lubrication, which I haven't lubricated these, they do not spin freely that long. So it goes back in part to the fact that the aftermarket metal wheel has been placed in a truck, and it does take some looking after to make sure there's adequate play and it's gauged correctly for you to have the best free wheeling that combination should provide you. And sometimes it just simply don't work, and you got to you got to change the wheel set out in the truck, or maybe the truck is worn to the point where it's time to get a newer replacement. Most all the manufacturers you can buy the trucks aftermarket for replacement purposes.
Yeah.
I hope that helps you out on that one.
It did, yep.
All should spin. I'll leave you with that thought. By George, when you go down and do that little wheel should doggone well spin, and if it don't, then it's really a friction bugger, and it's going to most likely cause a tracking problem when you're out running with it.
There's been some conversation going back and forth about the best way to pull the axles out from the trucks. Do you have a favorite method for your different manufacturers?
Yeah, it depends on the mood I'm in, I guess.
What mood you're in?
Most of the LGB product, the Pico product, you can forcibly pull the trucks out. They will pop out. You have, it's like everything else. I mean, you should be delicate but firm, as we say, in so doing that. I found it to be more easily done, let's say in the case of the LGB product, with the old time truck product, the older style, if you will, of truck. Whereas the contemporary trucks, these buggers, no, they're much heavier. They will not bend as much. And I've always found the need to come in and remove the screw, at least move one side of the screws to pull this out, position the wheels back in and put it back and put the screw back in its correct location.
Yeah.
So they're all readily removable. You don't have to force them, because I would say the older the truck, therefore the plastic is going to be a little bit brittler. And the odds are if you force it too much, it's going to protest to the point where it breaks on you. And maybe there's no need for that. I got to say that the Norel product is pretty doggone robust. It's held up, considering the kind of wear and tear that we put these things through, has held up immensely, quite fine over all this time. But all of those can be delicately disassembled with screwdrivers, at least taking one side off to put wheel sets in and out. And the advantage is, again, to take the wheel sets out, even if you're planning on maintaining them, is to see what the wear status is of that circular hole where the axle fits in. If it's starting to oval out, you're going to get tracking problems. It's telling you it's wearing too much. Okay. We'll move on to couplers. Don't have to go too far, because most of my equipment here has.
That's right. You got to move over 2 inches in all your couplers. Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to start out in the same business, coupler maintenance. Okay, so with few exceptions, now, okay, with half of the product available on the market, typically comes with the absolutely non-prototypical hook and loop, as is affectionately known, coupler. Now, and people ask, well, why do they do that? Well, because it's extremely robust, puts up with a lot of abuse, and quite simply works. Now, one's definition of works may be the issue at hand here. If you're pulling a long train, they still work. If you're trying to push that train backwards and it's long, you got a problem, because you're putting the force on the truck, not on the car body. And there's where the problem gets, it tends to want to skew the trucks on the rail and tends to force a derailment if the car isn't heavy enough to overcome the momentum created. Backing up is the tour de force of the issue associated particularly with couplers and derailments here.
Yeah.
So the issue associated with the hook and loop units, from a maintenance standpoint, what to look for, the element that is more likely than not that'll fail is this crazy little plastic screw. It's not even a spring. It's just a plastic assembly whose job in life is to maintain the hook tight against the loop.
Yeah.
So that when you couple the cars together, it only temporarily drops down and re-engages to keep the cars together. Over time, the plastic gets tired. Over time, it takes the abuse, and it'll typically shear, and you'll have to replace it. It's no big deal. You just take the single screw out that's there and replace it. And you can get these are sold in usually packs of 10 or 12 by the manufacturers. I've had problems at times with the pins that hold the
hook
into the loop portion of the truck too. Those are a force fit when you get them initially, and therefore they go in with force and they come out with similar. They just sort of disappear on you every once in a while, depending on the track. The biggest problem I've seen with people that have the hook and loop couplers are the uninitiated to the hobby can't figure out how to get the blooming things undone when two cars are on the track. And they'll pull and they'll push and they'll finally, and a lot of times these hooks will get wrenched and parts will break off.
Oh, it's just another instance you get your credit card out.
There you go. But these buggers are really robust. Even for the folks that run your engines full bore into a set of cars, the couplers tend to put up with that abuse. I'm surprised at how robust they are. But they are all connected to the truck. I know of no instance where that hook and loop coupler is connected directly to the car body. They're all connected to the trucks, and therefore they present that tracking problem and that backup problem and potentially derail problem, which leads you into the topic of, why? Well, I'll finish off the maintenance. What else do you have to maintain? None of this stuff needs lubricated. Okay, it really doesn't. Just the wear and tear issue is the only item at hand. We'll come back
the
to that
little springy
lubrication
part
issue
does tend to get a little wonky sometimes.
What'll happen is the spring over time will weaken out, and if that hook will drop down and stay dropped down, and therefore it won't keep the cars coupled.
Yeah,
and you got to get back to replacing. That's the only way is just to replace the bugger.
Yeah.
Okay. So
doesn't look like much love for the hook and ladder or hook and loop in the comment section.
No, there's not. Sorry to put you out there, Dunbar, but
well,
hook and loop are meant to be disposable. Just
throw them away. Well, they're totally unprototypical. But I'll say this: if you like to quote run your equipment, the business of going out like we've talked about already, and the controls end of it, turn the power on, have the trains run through the garden, and run while you sit down and maybe tip back a brew or so, or do something else in the yard. Hey, ain't broke, don't fix them. They're quite fine. They work great. They don't show up in many photos, so I wouldn't worry about the visuals of it. Yeah. If you're into the more prototypical issue, then that's where the issue of their change out comes to pass. Yeah. I want to make sure I've touched base with all the pieces here. All the manufacturers of that, even if you get, even our friends here with AccuCraft will provide even if it comes with the standard looking knuckle coupler, they will still include the hook and loops in the packaging to be retrofitted by you. Why? Well, because if your entire railroad, with the few exceptions that you've purchased a piece of equipment on, have the hook and loops, obviously it's maybe to your advantage to continue that usage.
Yeah. One tip I will give for hook and loopers out there, like myself, I do use the hook and loops, but I went through, and when you buy this is an LGB car, but when you buy it, it only comes with the hook on one end, but the loop, and on the other end you have just a loop. So you go out and buy another hook and put a hook on both ends, so you're doubling up each. So each end has a hook on, and it's doubled up more or less, and it will keep things a little more consistent. If one side gets a little weaker, you got a little extra hooking up.
It's probably a good transition point that, if you're going to get into now the business of, I want my equipment to look more prototypical, and therefore a knuckle coupler is the direction I want to go in. Well, a couple issues there. If you're going to start through if you got a couple dozen cars, and like everything else, now you're going to spend $10 a pair for couplers, let's say. The question, and your time being as valuable as it is, you can't get everything done at the same time. Take one of your cars, take the hook and loop off of one end of it, put a retrofit coupler in this case is a Katie, and you can, as you work your way through the transition, still be able to run all your equipment in order to get there from here without having to sideline any pieces of equipment because they won't couple up to things. On the transition issue, what to say? Well, there's a number of manufacturers out there. I know USA Aristocraft was probably the largest. Aristocraft's name comes up. They're out of business, but there's tons of their equipment out there on the used car market, and therefore the stuff continues to show up. This is their typical knuckle coupler, which is you're going to find all the couplers out there are a simulation of the real thing, and each of them have their own peculiarities on how the knuckle couples.
Yeah,
or uncouples, as the case may be.
And the main reason I've gone hook and loop is because I bought a used set of many different cars, and every knuckle was different. I had no two that were the same, and I was like, what? Yeah, there we go.
Do we want to flip up to
let's go to the other camera here.
There we go. Okay, so what are we looking at? Okay, so here is the Aristo, and you can see it has this strange little spring tag element, and that's what opens and closes the knuckle. Here's the LGB product. Oops, excuse me. Here's the LGB product here. And again, they sort of look, but not quite look prototypical in general. But then they got this gosh awful looking little peg on the bottom too, whose job in life is to open and close the knuckle also. And last but not least, at least what I brought here tonight, okay, here's the Bachmann knuckle coupler. Same kind of story. They have theirs drops down and raises up. And so each of these things are coupled and uncoupled differently. And each of these things, some of them, now we'll get back down to our camera here maybe. How's that? I think I'll drive you nuts. I'm sorry about that. Each of these, some will couple, some will not. Some will stay coupled, some will not. Once again, just like I commented on the wheels, if you're going to bite the bullet on putting knuckle couplers on your equipment, I can only highly recommend you pick a manufacturer and you stay with it. Now, the problem we face from a hobby standpoint is most of the original equipment manufacturers, LGB, Pico, Bachmann, USA, everyone, their couplers don't fit on the competing products equipment. You can't take a Bachmann coupler easily and put it on an Aristo car. They just don't work that well. And that's why most manufacturers provide that notorious hook and loop as a backup in the scheme of things, because this whole problem really drives you nuts from a hobby perspective in terms of enjoying all the different kinds of equipment. So who comes to our rescue on that? Well, in general, I'll bring Katie then up to the forefront. Katie, as a after equipment manufacturer, of course they've been in those smaller scales forever, and they got into G scale in a similar manner, and therefore offer a coupler for all intents and purposes every piece of equipment that's out there. Where's my list? Yeah, here it is. They offer, put a card out here. Two basic types. First off, make my point. Okay, you don't need to read this. Take my word for it. This is one page out of multiple pages that Katie has put together that lists every G-scale manufacturer and their respective engines and cars, and what particular combination of coupler and coupler pocket they recommend on their product to fit it so that it works. Yeah, they're crazy because every one of those things require a different little gizmo part in some cases to fit.
Wow.
If you can boil it down though, I got them here, but I'll show the picture. It's a little bit bigger. Okay, this is the typical KD coupler that fits back onto the extension arm of the truck directly. That's what I have here. That's all I've done. I unscrewed these are working so good, they're connected up.
Yeah.
All I had to do was take the single screw out of the bottom that held the old hook and loop in place, position the KD coupler back, and put the screw back. Okay, now, one minor issue for all those, the coupler tends to stick out too far to, quote, really be dead on prototypical, but they sure help let the cars navigate sharper track. I'll show you in a little bit how that problem gets solved. But for this purpose, the point is you can purchase these typically come in pairs. They typically are $9-ish kind of things unless you get them on sale. So you can put a car, you can replace the couplers on a car for $9 or less if you're doing it. I'm not going to get into all the fine points of the KD coupler other than to say that they are the only ones I know of that are crazy enough to go through the process that they've done in an attempt to utilize their couplers on the full broad range of G-scale equipment that's out there. Now, the other advantage is, and I'll point out the AccuCraft car, again, pretty much fine scale flat car from AccuCraft. Now, it's technically AML. They produce their own knuckle coupler. Well, it does work that the KD coupler does mate up with and couple into and work with those, and as well as there are some other knuckle couplers out on the market. You just got to have a go at it. That the KD couplers will in fact work with, engage, and effectively, let's say, couple. Now, when it comes to uncoupling it, now that's a different thing. Now you got two different couplers with two different ways of uncoupling them. But in terms of running equipment, they will work together. There are some fine points that you got to deal with. Whether or not the couplers line up vertically is the big issue here. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That all goes back to how you put a KD coupler. By the way, David, is everybody able to hear me okay on the mic?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had no complaints.
No complaints? Oh, well, I'm going to have to do better.
That's right. Got to work a little harder at that, right?
If you can, go ahead and flip back to the side camera here. We'll try to.
Oh, I can do everything here.
Okay.
Well,
so one of the other things that Katie does, and no, I'm not getting any residuals off Katie here. Just trying to give you.
But we are open to offers.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Okay, so Katie offers what they call their gauge, a coupler gauge, which is a standard coupler. This is a body mount coupler that's mounted on a gauge that sits on the track, whose primary job is to establish the proper elevation above the rails for their coupler unit, so that they work properly. Okay, and
I think I'm going to come over and bring the camera right in.
Okay, that's fine. While you're doing that, I'll make comment that, the same holds true with the hook and loops, but they're pretty. I gotta say they're pretty residual. They'll put up with even differential elevations in the coupler business, and they'll still work. Maybe the most extreme condition of that is if you deal with the Bachmann Thomas the train sets for the kids. They come with horrendously sized hook and loop couplers, and they don't match up to the same elevation.
Yeah, I bought some on Amazon by mistake.
Yeah,
And
but they will couple. You may not be able to get them uncoupled, but they will couple.
You can grind them down. It's just plastic.
Okay, so what we're trying to point up here is we'll start this process out. You bring the car back up, and the idea is, of course, both couplers need to be at the same elevation. If your car has the truck wheel combination such that the coupler is mismatched, it's higher or lower, you need to take measures to correct that. And that's usually corrected through the use of shims. And oh yeah, surprise, surprise, Katie offers, but they didn't hear that. Shims. There they are. What are they? They're pieces of plastic of different thicknesses whose job in life is to adjust the relationship of the coupler to the car body in order to make that elevation correct. Now, that's great if you've chosen the business of placing the coupler on the car body, not on the truck, as we've done here. In this case, where the coupler, in Katie's case, they're, what is it? 909? Yeah. Katie's 909 typically fits most of the cars out there, USA trains, LGB, Pico. And it dawns on me right now to make a point, interestingly enough. Of all the manufacturers that I'm aware of out there that do offer knuckle couplers, the one major manufacturer that does not is Pico. I've talked to Pico about that a number of times. They said they are simply not getting into knuckle couplers because they feel that if someone wants them bad enough, they'll go to someone like Katie and retrofit their equipment. They just didn't want to get into that extra pieces part business. But I think every other manufacturer out there is offering some form or fashion in their own line of a knuckle coupler type. Not that it matches up with another manufacturer's knuckle coupler, but at least they can claim they have knuckle couplers particularly for contemporary equipment. So we got that issue. Let's see, what do we want to say here? The less costly solution is to put the Katie coupler with its receiver box onto existing wheel truck assemblies. But that does bring up the issue that there's a little bit of a prototypical look, a little bit off. And there's also the problem of you're still utilizing the truck to transmit the power of the engine pulling and pushing the cars. And no different than the hook and loops, you'll have the same problem with even the Kadies when it comes to equipment derailing when you're backing up. Because the same problem is occurring. It isn't a problem with the coupler, it's a problem with the truck being skewed on the rail, causing the potential of the wheel overriding the rail and derailing. Okay, we get on that? But that brings you to the next piece of the puzzle here, the ability to body mount the couplers. And before I get into that, seeing how I'm sitting here and I pulled this up and didn't want to you have the hook and loop couplers, you have the knuckle couplers that are on the market. And I know of, one manufacturer, that being LGB, and a aftermarket detail supplier, Ozark, formerly Ozark Miniatures. Now I believe they've been bought out by another company. I'm gonna have to check that. That offer good old Lincoln pin. Now, if you want to go crazy in the hobby, right? Lincoln pin couplers, which I have a set of. Here's a pair of log trucks, and these are dead on to prototype kind of stuff here, where you got a link and a pin that you can pull out in order to provide a prototypical look to the equipment And they do hold up. I mean, you can pull dozens and dozens of cars with these things, even though they're plastic, because it's that derailment material.
But the tolerances are tight, so they're
tight.
not pushing against each other, working against each other.
Yeah, they work far better than the Talgo hook and loops. They're prototypical. I have taken, and you can buy these for retrofit purposes in packages. I believe they come in packages of 6. I've taken them and taken the hook and loop couplers off, not got for the overtime equipment, which would be more prototypical, and put the hook and the pin in. Here we go. The hook and the pin couplers on them for an old time look. Now, if you want to couple and uncouple cars, a lot of times you're crazy out of your mind if you want to do that with these things, because it's still pretty small stuff. But prototypically looking, they look great, and those are available out there, and they're not that expensive. In the case of Ozark, they actually make theirs out of metal, whereas LGB makes theirs here out of the Norel plastic. Both work. Okay, that was a little bit of a sidebar. Back to our Kadee solutions, and particularly the body mount. So the question becomes, well, why? What's the advantage of the body mount over the truck mounted? And it's prototypical looking, and the equipment tracks better. Now, the annoying part of the problem is you normally, in many cases, you have to perform surgery on your car. You have to cut something off or groove something out to allow the coupler to fit flush on the car body. Yeah, here we go. These are the Kadee 906s. I was also amazed when you got on the Kadee site, because of this whole business of the different parts it takes in some cases to mount different cars, the accessory aspects of this stuff. But the basic couplers that you would normally use for G-scale equipment are either going to be the truck-mounted 909s or the body-mounted 906s. How's that as a starting point? Now, if you don't like the black color, then you can get them in oxide red, pre-painted, so that you don't gum up the thing with a coat of paint. And that's a 906R, amazingly enough, for rust. How's that for concept-wise? Okay, now once you get into the knuckle couplers, unlike the Talgos, which I said you don't have to do, or you have to do very little maintenance and absolutely no lubrication. When you get into the Kadees, you do, from a, let's say, a maintenance standpoint, once they're on the car, you do have to lubricate them.
Okay.
There are no less than at least one spring in the case of the 906s, and no less than 3 springs in the case of the 909s. And that means those are moving parts, and those need lubricated. Now, I will say I still stick there. You can either use graphite, or I've still had luck because of, again, the plastic compatibility issue with the CRC 262.
Yeah.
The idea with all that is less is more. Okay, you don't want to be gumming up the equipment with lubricant.
No. Do they come in stainless?
Do they come in stainless?
Like the whole coupler? Do they make them?
No, they do not. That is one thing I can confirm. Okay. These are plastic, and they do not make them in metal. Okay, there are some of the I know some of the Bachmann C19, the tender I had in last time, has Bachmann, their version of a scale knuckle coupler, and it is metal. Mm-hmm. And it does work, and the Kadees are compatible with it. They will couple into it. So what you're looking at here is obviously the coupler element itself, and then the body, the box, that ultimately needs mounted to the underside of a car. Use this, it's a little easier to see. Okay. Now, in this case, these are Kadee units. These are not 906, 909, so I shouldn't confuse the issue. But the point I'm wanting to make here is going to be similar. You have to provide a flat mounting surface for the coupler body inside the truck location, and typically requires some element of surgery on the car. Go back to YouTube. You'll find plenty of YouTube videos where people are mounting Katy couplers on G-scale equipment and all the fine surgery that takes place with that, be it razor saws or Dremel tools.
Sure.
And I don't need to take our time up here because we don't have time. But the point remains. Now, okay, the most valuable point that you'll take out of this is what I'm now about to say. Yes, you want the coupler for its operational characteristics. They do work, and you can pull tons of cars. Even though these things are made out of plastic, they will still pull a ton of cars.
Yeah.
They are very robust. They also have a so-called automatic feature with them. With the use of a magnet, you can uncouple the cars automatically, but you can just as easily take a screwdriver between cars, place it down through the couplers, and uncouple that way. Unlike a credit card that we use with the hook and loops, where we slide the credit card down between them, this one all you do is take a screwdriver and twist it, and it'll uncouple for you. You have the prototypical look, the robustness, the scale appearance, back to scale appearance, and you have the means by which to mount them on the cars. The singular problem that occurs when you do that is what you're seeing here. Notice what happens with the truck. Now, assuming that you've done surgery on your truck, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to cut off the arm, this former element that holds the former hook and loop coupler. You're going to wind up cutting it off back near the bolster, and therefore you're going to have a truck that has no arm left on it. So number one is you're going to permanently alter the car. You're never going back to hook and loops after you decide to go with knuckles, okay? Some people who are more into the collector angle of things, they'll have real emotional problems with that.
Yeah.
The other element that I find to be even more concerning is even if you've cut the tang off, it limits the play on typically freight car, well, all cars but passengers, because the passenger cars, the trucks are so far in, the coupler boxes typically miss them. But on most every freight car I've run across, even contemporary ones, that coupler box is going to limit the rotation of the truck.
Right.
And what does that mean? That means, remember we've talked about radiuses already. I recommend 4-foot radius, 8-foot diameter. Well, on the short cars, which represent what, 40 up to 36 footers, okay. The older time cars, that's fine. Those will still run. Those won't run to the limit of a 4-foot radius piece of rail, which, by the way, we have here. Amazing. Here's our typical 8-foot radius rail. And without trying to do too much monkeying around here, the point I'm trying to prove here is, yes, that the car will not bind to the coupler box. It'll still remain free and operational. However, if you get contemporary equipment, 50-foot, 60-foot box cars, flat cars, tank cars, auto rail cars, mostly the USA equipment, you are going to have a problem.
Right.
And what that means is either the car will not negotiate your 4-foot radius, 8-foot track, or you hopefully have a larger radius track in the scheme of things to start out with. Now, and you know, that gets into this whole business of planning and designing a railroad. What kind of railroad do you want? Are you into contemporary diesel, long car, long train equipment? Well, then you really should be considering larger radius curves to begin with. They look better. They look more prototypical. They take up more yard. I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
But if you then are going to get into this coupler business, then you're forced into it. Otherwise, the equipment simply will not go around the shorter radius curves. They simply will not do that.
Right.
And obviously, even here, I doubt this will not negotiate a 2-foot radius, 4-foot starter set rail. It will not do that.
No.
Okay.
No.
So I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from the retrofit coupler business, but I'm just bringing up a major issue that you'll quickly run into. And, and there's costs associated with all this stuff. And therefore, it's valuable to understand where you're going before you get there. Okay.
Yep.
Let's see.
Yep.
Anybody got questions out there at the moment?
I haven't seen any questions immediately here.
Yeah, again, even the retrofit body mount couplers are still the same, basically $9 a pair, and that's kind of an MSRP-ish kind of thing. You can actually find them for lower cost if you get on the internet. So you're talking no more than $9 a car. But considering what we've talked about tonight, okay, you bought yourself your $25 car, now you're going to wind up with four new wheels, metal wheels, and potentially new couplers, and you're going to have another $20+
Adds up quick.
And when you have, I'm sure any of us only have a dozen cars, right? Yeah, there's the economics of it, okay, to be considered. And maybe what that concludes for us here is why a lot of us still have hook and loop couplers and plastic wheels on our equipment.
Yeah.
If I had to make a decision between retrofitting couplers versus retrofitting wheels, always I'll recommend going the metal wheel route before I consider the coupler issue from a cost perspective.
Okay.
The wheels will give you far greater benefits in terms of operational capability in the scheme of things. And the other thing is, like I say, and you go on the internet with the retrofit videos on there, you're going to find that, monkeying around with the cars, you're going to spend, a half hour-ish, some maybe more, depending on how you screw up on them. And so there's a time factor involved too. But that's why we do this during the winter, right? Because we got all the time in the world as we're locked into our basements here.
Yeah. It's been a cold month. So, the only comment I've had on questions is you've explained everything so well. Nobody has any questions. So,
no one has any questions.
And I have to agree. Dave, do you have any parting words, questions, thoughts?
No, I think my brain's just swimming with all the information. It seems so basic, like a basic topic, just couplers and wheels, but man, there's so much to it. And Bill, I'm amazed. I would love to see your basement one day because you pull out stuff like one thing after
I'm
another.
over here and not in my own basement doing this because he's got room and I don't.
Right.
I didn't know half that stuff existed. So, but again, for the millionth time, thanks for getting this together.
Well, I'll leave the topic tonight by the few recommendations. We've already given the caution. If you're going to replace your equipment with metal wheels, settle on a particular brand and direction for consistency, therefore similar tracking, similar weight ratios, the whole 9 yards, similar looks, and I'll say same two with couplers, but basically you're pretty much into the Katie. Maybe the only distinction is they do offer in the G scale category 2 scales of coupler. Because again, see, in G scale we run from 1 to 20.3. Now you even get into the 7/8 scale, but 1 to 20.3 all the way down to 1 to 32. And once you get down into 129 and 132nd scale equipment, basically the contemporary equipment, they offer a smaller size, number 1, as they call it, coupler, slightly smaller, in order to match up look-wise with the equipment, versus the larger G scale knuckle that we had here tonight for the equipment. As far as I know, both of them perform almost identically. Both of them look identical except their physical size, and have the same requirements and issues associated with mounting and whatnot on them.
Yeah.
So there you go. I'll consider the topic of wheels, trucks, couplers, maintenance, and replacement covered at this point. We'll deal with additional topics later.
Yeah, I mean, we can always brush up on something on our beginning of our next show if we discover something we've lost here. But so, Bill, thanks for bringing all of this over. It was only 2 crates tonight. We made only one trip into the basement tonight, and but thank you, and thank you for all the explanation. Unfortunately, now I'm gonna have to go spend some money on some stainless steel wheels so I can leave my trains out in the rain if I want, or run them out in the rain. But something to think about. So I'd like to finish off here. We want to plug the show for this Friday night. Since if you've stuck around for our show this long, you will want to see Large Scale Consolidated on Friday night. They have a guest. Sean Fields is going to be their guest this week. It looks like maybe there's some live stream, which I know, Bill, you've dabbled in live stream as well. So I don't know if my wife would be crazy with a live steam setup down here in the basement, but maybe we'll do that outdoors.
We'll be making tea in a teapot.
You're making tea with the teapot, right? Yeah. So, but Andrew and Sean's show is 8:30 this Friday, and every other Friday they have a show, Large Scales Consolidated. So go check it out. It's a great show. But at this point, we are wrapping it up, and there's really only one thing left to do is let's get outside, run some trains, maybe when it warms up. But I did get a little bit of good news, I think, in the last week or so, that the Franklin Park Conservatory is bringing back the Paul Bussey train display. So that should be firing back up this spring. Bill, I know you've been doing a little bit of maintenance work for
I was
him.
going to put the caveat in there if Bill Logan gets their engines back.
Yeah, if Bill gets their engines all running. So I did get a sneak peek in the behind the scenes over there. Maybe we'll do something a little further next year with them. But everybody have a great night. Dave, thanks again for joining us and chiming in. And any parting comments before we watch some trains here? No? All right. Well, good night, everybody. Have a great week.